Recording. So hello
Yep,
everyone.
looks good.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the GDSC's Intro to React Native event. My name is Ryan, and today we're going to give you the introduction and the tools required to learn React Native. And we're also going to walk out on a workshop where we will create a special personal agenda project that y'all can add to your resume. Now, before we get started, welcome back from spring break. This is the first GDSC meeting since the end of spring break. And for those who are new here, welcome to the GDSC. We're open to all majors. And if you would like to join us at UCF, it's really easy. We have a link tree and a little tiny URL all here on this page, also a QR code. If you want to look at all our resources, our socials, our calendar, mailing lists, etc., to help you kickstart and join us in the GDSC. And for those who are unfamiliar, here is a calendar of all the events that we have hosted in March and are going to host. Today is the 23rd. As you see, we still have some office hours on this Friday and also a game night next Thursday. So definitely be on the lookout for that if you aren't already. Also, we would also like to make an announcement that the submissions for the solution challenge is now open. For those who are unfamiliar with the solution challenge, we have a breadth of resources on the GDSC Discord for you to check out and learn more about. But if you are ready to submit already for the Google Solution Challenge, amazing. There's a QR code on the page right here that y'all can click and enter in order to submit and make your submission for the Google Solution Challenge. With that all out the way, why don't we get started in talking about today's event, the React Native Workshop. My name is Ryan. I'm going to be one of the speakers here today. I'm a tech lead here at the GDSC UCF and a computer science major. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm also one of the tech leads at GDSC. I'm a computer engineering majors, and today I'm going to be helping with the coding section and also the final UI for the application.
Amazing. There's also plenty of other core team members here in the chat today with us. If any of y'all have any questions at any point throughout today's workshop, feel free just to ask in the chat and a core team member will be readily available to answer your question. With that all out the way, let's get started on what is React Native. React Native is a Meta-created open source JavaScript framework that allows for cross-platform development of applications. For those who have heard of React, React Native is similar to React. They are both founded on this philosophy of React coding. And so any experience that you have writing websites using React.js, you can also cross-apply into React Native. With that, React Native and React Web both use JSX, a syntax that lets you write HTML elements inside JavaScript. For those who are familiar with JavaScript, you might know that it's a little annoying writing HTML elements inside your JavaScript code. So JSX is an amazing tool that we will readily soon see allow you to easily implement and input HTML elements into your JavaScript code. And the last and most important part of React Native is that it is a cross-platform framework. Prior to React, you had to know either a certain Java framework to do Android development. And if you wanted to do any sort of iOS development on that mobile end, you would need to learn Objective-C or Swift or one of those other iOS tailored languages. React Native was the first of its kind, giving you just one tool, one language that allows you to create apps that are functional on both iOS and Android. It's not that smooth, however. Whenever you want to create an app, usually most people tailor it to one end of the spectrum still at the end of the day, whether that be an iOS-centric app or an Android-centric app, because there is some things that you might have to do. So as a result, to make everything very easy and seamless in today's workshop, we are going to prioritize making our app more Android-based. We do have to note that this is because there's still some features in iOS development that aren't as easily able to be, I guess, retrieved on a Windows development environment. So with that all out the way, let's do a kickstart on React fundamentals. React's bread and butter are components. Whenever you hear someone talking about React, the reason they use React as opposed to other frameworks is because of this idea of components. The React Native documentation defines components as blocks of independent, reusable code. But what does that mean? I can easily argue that functions and classes are also independent and reusable. Components, however, are a little different. They are also nestable. Think about when you're working with divs in HTML. Usually we nest an outer div and an inner div with different properties and purposes. In React, we can write this thing called a component and treat it pretty similarly. Here we have a React component written in two different ways. On the left side here, we have something that is called a functional component. And on the right side here, we have something that is called a class component. These are both the same exact component. They're just written in different coding paradigms. On the right here, you might be more familiar if you've taken your OOP class or learned any other class-based language. It is just an implementation of a component using classes. If you look on the left here, if any of y'all are familiar with some sort of functional programming language, this is what functional components aims to do in React Native. They try to bring in functional programming into the language. As a result, whenever you are looking at React Native or React code online, you will routinely see these two different ways of implementing components, functionally and class-based. Today, in today's workshop, we will be using functional components in order to program our personal agenda. So with that being said, let's dive a little bit deeper on what components are and what these specific components do. If we look at these two components, we can realize that A, they do the same thing, but B, it's not that hard to see what they do. For example, I can look at this component here, and I can see that it's called welcome, and we pass in this thing called props. And I'm returning a header from HTML, if you remember that says hello and someone's name, and then we close the header. For those who are familiar with HTML and recognize this header element, this is exactly why JSX is so powerful. JSX is what allows us just to write this header element inside our JavaScript code. It's really useful and really nice. But talking more about the component side of things here, we can see that this is a component that essentially creates a header that says hello and whoever's name that we pass in. And now if we want to call these two components written in either way, all we do is rewrite the component's name, in this case, welcome, and we pass in a name variable, in this case, DSC members. This will create a header that says, hello, DSC members, and it'll be very easy for us to use. Now, this is a good example of a React component because it demonstrates two things. A, it shows us how easy it is and nice to reuse code. This is where we talked about the reusability and recyclable nature of React earlier. We can simply call components like this as if they were HTML elements. Really nice. And the second thing we can do is we can pass in variables. This is a good lesson of what this props variable does. Props is shorthand for properties. It is essentially an object that stores a slew of variables. If in this implementation of this welcome component, I decide to put something else besides name. Let's say I decide to write color is equal to red. I will still just pass in this one props variable. And instead, in here, I can now access props.color. So props can hold an infinite number of variables as long as when I'm basically initializing my component, I just keep listing whatever variables I want to pass in. So that is what properties are. Now let's talk about core components. If you've ever coded in any programming language, you might be familiar with native methods. One of the first native methods we learn in our introductory to coding languages class is probably like a print statement. That is a native method written inside the programming language. In React Native and React, we have these things called core components. They're just kind of the same thing. They're native components that are already pre-built into the language that we can use and are used very often. Many of these core components mock HTML elements that we commonly see when we're developing websites. So if any of you come from more of a web development side of things, you will have a really easy time transitioning into mobile development when you use React Native. If we look at this table right here, you can really see how easy it is. A view component, which is this left-hand side of this table right here, is similar to a non-scrolling div. A text component is similar to a p tag. An image component, similar to IMG in HTML, and etc. One thing we do have to note here that's a little bit funky if y'all are unfamiliar with with mobile development is we have two components here that signify a non-scrolling div and a div. This is because if you are using your mobile application, it is routine that some applications only want you to see just the screen and not scroll up and down like a website. However, in other times in which we do want to scroll, we will use a scroll view. So something like your browser will use a scroll view div encapsulating everything. And something like a game, like Flappy Bird, for example, would probably use a non-scrolling div. With core components out of the way, now let's talk about arguably the hardest thing with React development. Up to this point, someone could have easily called me out on chat saying that everything that I've said so far could be implemented in JavaScript. Although you can implement everything I've said so far in vanilla JavaScript, arguably not as elegantly, it is still there's still one point of React that makes it so special and why a lot of people prefer it, and that is states. So you can think of states as private fields in a class. For those who have taken OOP or worked with any object-oriented software, let's pretend I was to make a car class with a private field of miles per gallon and color. I can transition that same philosophy into components. I can create a React component that acts as a car, and it has states instead of private fields of miles per gallon and color. However, the one point that makes states different from private fields and classes is that React elements can have React components can have relationships with other components. Remember earlier that we said that components are nestable? When you write your HTML codes, you can have a parent and multiple children underneath that. You can do the same exact thing with React components. And if you were to change the state of any individual component, what it will do is it will re-render that component and it will re-render all of its parents. You see, if I was to make a car class and I change the color to blue, for example, it will change just that car object. But in React, if I was to change a car component's color to blue, it will re-render that car, but it will also re-render all of its parents. Now, in a car, we might not understand why this might benefit us. But imagine if the parent was the highway, for example, and we said now we will pass up to the highway that there's a blue car on the highway. Maybe now the police officer or something with a blue car that makes it so unique will change something in my code. Now, car isn't the best example of this, but we will see why states are so powerful in today's workshop and how we can utilize the ability of it re-rendering parents to really exploit React to its fullest. Now, we do have to preface many times that states are very, very hard. It is probably the hardest thing to wrap my mind around when I was learning React. And it is a lot when you're trying to understand a code base. So here's a tip I used when I was learning React for myself for the very first time. Use props to configure a component when it renders. Use state to keep track of any component data that you expect to change over time. Anytime that you are trying to write out a component and don't know whether to make something a proper state, look back at this tip, and I assure you, it will make a lot more sense and you will be able to write your component much more elegantly. The last thing we will discuss in today's kick launch of React is hooks. In React, there are these methods called life cycle methods. They signify the current life cycle of a component. For example, let's say we have a login component. We want the user to put in their username and password. And after they input their username and password, we want to write a header that says, "Success, you've logged in." But immediately after it says, "Success, you've logged in," I want to transfer them to whatever our app is, whether that be like a bank. I would want to transfer you to their bank account. That is why we can use lifecycle methods to actually implement that. What I will do is I will use the component did mount method. And I will say, once that header mounted or rendered that says "Success, you've logged in," I will do whatever. In this case, I will change the page to their bank account information. As a result, we can see why lifecycle methods are so useful when we're working in front-end development in order to make our apps more dynamic. However, when we are using lifecycle methods, there's two ways to implement them. There's the traditional class component method. If you were to use class components, you would use all of these on the left. And there are these things called hooks, which we can see on the right. On the left, we see how we would implement them in class components. On the right is how it is translated. And because we're using the functional components today, we will be using hooks, which are a lot more verbose, maybe a little bit more confusing, but this is the cost that you have to incur in order to make your components a lot less code. So it's definitely a trade-off, but anytime that you're confused with what some of these code snippets look like in today's workshop, there are probably hooks, and you can always look back at this infographic to truly understand what these hooks do. Now, with that all out the way, we have kind of kickstarted everything that you need to know for React, at least the very basics. If any of you want a deeper dive into React or just the philosophy of React coding, I would highly suggest you to look on the GDSC UCF YouTube channel in order to look at our previous year's 3-part workshop on React for web development. There, we dive a lot deeper into all the little nitty-gritty details of React and really use it to its full advantage. Today will just be a very fast workshop with React Native, really showing you a little bit of how all the tools in React can give us a beautiful mobile application. So with that out the way, let's talk about today's workshop requirements. For our workshop today, we will be using these tools: VS Code, Node.js, a little bit of JavaScript and CSS, Android Studio, and an Android device is optional. When you are working in React Native, usually you can actually pull up your code and your application on your device. And because we are making an Android-centric application today, an Android device is optional if you want to play around with it. However, me and Alex also want to emphasize that we don't expect any of you to code along today. This is a very complex and not that fast or not that small of a workshop that we can expect you to code along with us. But we will upload all the code later, this video, this lecture, and this PowerPoint, and we welcome you to download these resources in order to recreate the project and workshop step by step. And when you do that, please look at these requirements in order to fully understand what tools Alex will be using in coding up today's workshop. So with that being said, I'm going to pass on the mic now to Alex, who will talk us through the actual workshop.
Thank you, Ryan. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me share my screen. Oh, it's not enabled, Ryan.
Okay, I'm sorry. You can share it now, I think.
Okay, now I can share it. Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna get started with how to create your first application in React Native. Once you have installed Node.js and npm, you're gonna have to go to your terminal, depending on whether you're on like Windows or Mac. It's gonna be the same command. So it's gonna be npx React Native init, and then the name of the project. So we're gonna call this agenda. And this might take a little while. So while it's doing that, let me show you how to set up the virtual environment. So we're gonna use Android Studio to run a virtual device. So let's open Android Studio first. Okay, before setting up the Android virtual device or AVD, we're gonna have to go to SDK Manager. This will install the software development kits depending on the Android version you're working on. So here's a bunch I selected. Since I already have to install, I'm not gonna like go over like which one to install and which one to not install. You can even go to older versions of Android. Once you selected these ones, you can go to SDK tools, and the ones that are marked here that has this minus sign, those are the ones you might want to include. However, there's this other one that is called Google USB driver. And this is in case you have an Android device and you want to test your application in the actual phone. You can do it by using this package. And once you do that, it'll install. It might take a little longer, so that's why I'm not doing it here. Okay, once you have that, let's go to AVD Manager to set up the virtual device. I already have one running, but just to show you how to create a new one from scratch, I'm gonna go to Create Virtual Device. And right now, there's only like Pixels phones or Google phones in Android Studio, but I think online there might be some other emulators to run a Samsung Galaxy or whatever other device. So let's say we want to choose a Pixel 2. We go to Next, and not all the versions of Android will show up here. Maybe this phone only get updated into Android 11, so the maximum you can update is to Android 11. You can choose any version you want, honestly, as long as you have the SDK for that version installed. So let's say we choose Android 11 because I have the SDK. So you hit on next. You don't have to change anything here, honestly. You can even like change the orientation, but that's not that important. So we're gonna click on finish. And once it's already set up, you can hit on this button to launch the AVD. Okay, this is the antivirus, don't worry. Okay, now that is up, let's wait until it's loaded. And we can actually turn it on. And let's see if our application is actually already created. Yep. All right. So now I'm not gonna run it because I'm gonna be running the actual application we have created for you guys. So what I do want to do is show you what to clean up from the project or the template that it created. So I'm gonna open a new window in Visual Studio Code. And let me move to this point here. And now let's pass in this one, the agenda. Now there's a few files that you have in here. You need to worry about those. This package JSON will have all the dependencies you installed. So this anything that you install like widgets or any like package will show up here. So let's go to the app.js, which is the one where you're gonna create your application, or it's kind of like the index.js that will show up on your screen. So we don't need this import type node React. We can get rid of that. We can basically get rid of all this stuff. We don't need it. And we don't even need the style sheets. Okay, but we do need to include like a component or a stateless functional component, as we call it, and call it app. Oh, we already have an app export default here, so we don't need that. Here, I'm not gonna include anything. It can be just a fragment. very important. This is how you import components or the core components as Ryan mentioned from React Native. You can see one of those were view, text, style sheet, scroll view, style sheet, and many others. But as I said, you don't need to use them all. But as a suggestion, just keep them because you never know which components you're gonna need. And once your application is good and running, you can get rid of the ones you didn't use. Okay, with that being said, let me just move to the actual slide. And for the styles for this application, there's a link to a GitHub repo where you can download all the style sheets for each one. Okay, so before we move on to the coding part, let's talk about the component we're building first. So we're gonna work on the app.js, and Ryan, you would like to explain this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alex. This is a little screenshot of what we're going to be building today in our workshop. And in the basis or kind of the core of every React Native application is a file called app.js. You can think of it as kind of like the main method of your React application. That's where it's going to start. So in our app.js file for now, what we're going to do is we're going to start building the home page, which looks like this. And we're going to get to some of these components later, but we're going to kind of build the skeleton of the home page now, which Alex will describe more technically.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So, okay, so if we can see in the previous page, oops, how do I go back? Okay, here. For this first screen, we're gonna have a title, which is gonna be called My Personal Agenda. We're gonna have a button that says Create New Task, so we can add more tasks to the main screen. And we don't need to worry about these components yet. We're gonna mention that along the way. So the best way to start an application is to put everything in a container. So here I'm using a safe area view component. This component is not necessary. You can even change it to a normal view or scroll view. The reason why I added this safe area view is in case you're working, for example, for an making the application for an iOS device which has a notch. So it will only take the area that it's like has white spaces or it has a screen in there. So you can even change that to a view. So to add the title, from our core components list, we're gonna use text. And we can just, the normal text tag on, or p tag on HTML, we're just gonna write whatever we want it to show up. Now, as you can see, and we are gonna add also a button. But let's go back to Visual Studio Code and let me show you something. Let me share the second screen. Okay. Now I have the application running here. Let me know if you can see it, Ryan and everyone.
We can see it.
Okay, perfect. So let's say we're gonna add a button. Okay, there's a component called button that is coming from React Native that I just imported here. So you can even do this. We can click button. And this one, it's only an opening tag, doesn't have a closing. And this one needs the title. So we can even include a title here. This is just to show what we wanted to say. So create a new task. And we're also gonna have probably a color. Let me grab some of from the style sheet. Let's say button new task. This one is good, kind of like an orange color. Okay, now we see on the application, we're gonna have a button. But this looks not nice. Like compared to the one we show in the picture, it doesn't look quite the same. So that's why instead of using a button, I'm gonna use something called a pressable component, which is gonna be kind of like a decorator for the component we're actually building. And this gives you more flexibility when creating components that are gonna be, for example, pressable in your device. So if we look now at the application, It's exactly the same, has the same functionality, and it's gonna just show up the actual form that we're gonna use to create a new task. Okay, now that we're talking about the second portion of the app.js, if we go back to slides, we're gonna have a list of the tasks that we just created. But before creating a task, we need to know how we actually gonna pull all this information, like introducee, the name of the course, the date, and also like what type of task it is. So that's why we're gonna need a model to show up the form. So models are kind of like pop-up screens. They're gonna be actually included like, or they're gonna be placed on top of your main application once it's called or once it's shown as visible. And that model, or the first model that we're gonna use, it's gonna include the form. So let's gonna jump into the actual. Oh, by the way, before I talk about the form component, let's talk about what hooks and functions we're gonna create for this app.js. So we're gonna have a model visible and set model visible state, and that's because we're gonna need the model has a property called visible, right, which is a boolean, and when it's true, that means that the model will show up or it will be placed on the screen. If it's false, it will basically be either removed or it won't show up. So we want the model to show as false because we don't want it to show up at the beginning of the app. So that's why we set it initially to false. We're gonna have also a task state, which is gonna be an array, which is gonna include all the single tasks that we create from the form. And then we're gonna also have a separate model to display the information from the task. And we're gonna go over these functions once we create a task, so don't worry. Okay, so let's jump into the form component. And Ryan, do you wanna explain what this component has?
Yeah, sure. So like we saw in the app earlier, anytime we want to create a new task, we've designated a button for the users to click Create New Task. Now, when they click on that button, we want to show them this form, a form that allows them to specify the course or type of event, the task or event name, also a calendar for them to decide when that event deadline is, and a small text box for the description. This form element will be critical for the users actually filling out data and pushing it inside our application. Alex, why don't you explain some of the technicalities behind this form component?
Yes, thank you. So let me go to the device so I can show you how this component works. So once we have the main screen, we're gonna click on create a new task, and this will show the model that has the form. So you can actually type any course name, the task, let's say introducee, homework 1, set up a deadline, and put the description. And we're gonna have two buttons to cancel and add. So the cancel will basically just get rid of the model or just like don't show it. That's what I was explaining before with how to set up the model using the state. So if we look on the code now, let's go back to the slides. We're gonna actually make it a scroll view because all the elements that are within this form are not gonna fit in the whole screen unless you have a bigger screen than the Pixel 3 I'm using. Okay, the first element is gonna be the title, which is a new task. And then we're gonna need to include some button to cancel it. Again, we're gonna use a pressable, we're not gonna use a button. There's a similar element than pressable called touchable, but the only difference might be on what events they include. And now that we're talking about events, let's look at here. This pressable has an onPress event, which is kind of like the onClick if you're familiar with web development. It will be basically the same, just like it makes more sense to call it onPress in a mobile application. Now, what this onPress will do is whatever things that we filled in, we just made it empty from their inputs and the calendar. So it's kind of like we're not gonna process that task because we are gonna cancel it. And also we're gonna close the model. Close the model will just like set the state to false again for the model to not show up. The next thing we're gonna do is just put on the text in here. And again, as I said, these are kind of like decorators. We're gonna make this text to be a pressable object. So that's why I said like it's more flexible. We can put anything we want here and make it a pressable object. The next thing is gonna be the form itself. Now we're gonna add some text input fields here that is gonna have the course, is gonna have our task name. And don't worry, I think I messed up the names here. This should mean the opposite, but we're expecting that you can like, I think you will be able to fix it once once you start working on this on your own. So don't worry about it. But these two elements are basically the same. They have the same styles, they have the same text input and similar titles. But the new thing is the date picker. Now, this is not something that comes with React Native. This is something that you're going to install using the npm command. So any package that you want to install, you're going to have to use either npm or expo, whatever you have installed. And then that's when it'll show up on the dependencies. So I installed date picker. So if you look at your package JSON, you're gonna see here on your dependencies that React Native date picker is here. I don't know which version it will show up on yours, but probably it's different. Okay, so let's go back to the screen. This date picker has some props as well. It has a date, which is gonna be whatever deadline you want it to start with. It's gonna have something called locale, which is gonna set up the language. So you can set it to Spanish, English, any other language you want. Of course, we're gonna use English right now. And also we have an event called onDateChange. Let me explain a little on this one. So if we go to the application, when we are on the calendar, let's say we choose this one, but say we want to choose another day. This is an onChangeDate event. We're selecting any new date, any new time, and that's gonna be every time the onChange event or onDateChange event, actually. Okay, so this is pretty much it for the component. This part that is like the description is also a text input file. It's just a bigger one. And they all have like the onChange text, which actually is different from what you see, for example, in HTML or like normal React for web development. This one we just pass in the function, and this one will already pass in the value. So we can use onChange and then use an arrow function and then pass whatever the value is from the event. However, we cannot do something like e.target.value here. So we're going to be using this type of events where we just pass the function to it and it will automatically pass the parameter. With that being said, let's look at also the hooks and another functions that we have here. So we're going to have some states here, and these are just to create like what values or what like what is the information that each task is gonna have. So it's gonna have the name of the task, the name of the course, its deadline, and also some details or description about the task. And we're gonna need to use an ID. For example, if we're gonna include this to a database or somewhere, we always need an ID. In this case, we're not doing that, but we always include it just in case. Now, you don't need to worry about this use effect. We're not really gonna use it. But if you wanna go ahead and like create another functionality, maybe you wanna edit your task because maybe the deadline changed or the task got canceled, then you can use this use effect to like keep watching on whatever change on this variable task object, like whatever change on this task object occurs, and then whatever is in here, it will execute. That's the main use from use effect. Now, another function we're gonna have is called handle task. So this handle task works the following way. So let's say we haven't completed anything here and we add a new task. This will show an alert. So this won't create anything because it says to create a new task, all fields must be completed, which we haven't. So let's actually create a new task. Introduce C. Let's say homework 1. And let's choose any date, honestly. Here. Okay. Okay, this is a weird deadline for a homework, but whatever. Oh, by the way, if you're working on Android, please don't tap 2 times R fast because that will reload the app. If we want to write something like array, you're gonna have to write it like after a few seconds, second R. Okay, once we write this, now we add the new task, and now we're back on the main menu. Okay, so if we look back at our handle task, we're gonna have some array that it's gonna include all the properties that we're filling in, like task, course, deadline, and details. And we're gonna check that in case some of them are empty, we're gonna have an alert, which is gonna have the following 2 messages. It's gonna have error to create a new task, all fields must be created. And if you remember initially, if I click here, this is what the alert looks like. And there we have a button, it's by default there. So, okay, let's say the fields are not empty. We're gonna create the new task. So we create an object, which is called new task. And we pass all the values that we just created from the form. And for the ID, we're just gonna choose the date, the exact time right now, using this function. Okay, and we're gonna use a set task that is actually coming from the App.js component. And this is actually how you use props. So let me go back to Visual Studio Code. On the App.js, we have that set tasks. And if we look back on our form component, we're passing that function to it as well as the array. We don't need to pass the array always. It depends on whatever you want to pass into that component. You just include it as props. And then if you go back to here to the form, you can actually extract all those props in here. You can even write, you don't have to restructure this. You can write props and then using props.setTask, you can still get the same. But I would just destructure it because that makes it easier for like to extract all the values and with the same names and to not get confused. Okay, with that set task, we're gonna actually make a copy of whatever task already contained, which were probably can be probably an empty array, or it can even be an array with previous tasks that you included. So those don't get erased. And then at the end, we added the new task. After we do that, we're gonna close the model, and then we're gonna reset everything. So that's pretty much it, what our handle task function does. And of course, close model will just basically occur when you press the button that is at the end to add the new task. So on press and handle task, that's when it get called. Okay, so going back to the slides, we're gonna talk about our task component. So Ryan, can you explain us more about this component?
Yeah, of course. So after we filled out the form and created a new task, what we want to do is we want to show users the task that they've just created and previous tasks created. In order to do this, we're going to have these little white cards you see on the screenshot here, these annotation cards. And they're going to give a very short preview, more so just title of what the event is, and also give us an option to delete the event. So the task component is basically these little white cards. To get a little more information about how we technically implement it, I'm going to pass the mic on to Alex.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. So this component is actually very short. It doesn't have much stuff. It only has the pressable, and it's gonna have actually, let me show you the actual application. Let me see where's the emulator here. Okay. I'm just gonna cancel this one. So this is the actual component. As Ryan said, it's just some sort of part that is gonna have some text here. It's gonna have the name of the task, the date, and a button to delete it. But what's curious about this object is that it's a pressable, and it will display the information once you press it. That's why I said like pressables are actually more flexible than just single buttons, because they can be like be included everywhere, and that you can actually put anything inside those. So the pressable will have a container, and that's gonna have all the information that we just show up. It's gonna have the annotation, it's gonna have the name of the task, and the format date. Now, this format date is a function I created called as a helper method. So if you can see, we're gonna only use it to format or to show how we want the date to display on the screen. So we're just gonna create a new date that is gonna be passed by reference, and we're gonna give it some options. So we're gonna have the week date, the year, the month, and the date. And then we can just set up the language here and pass in the options to this call to local date string, which is a method from a date object. Now, how you import it from task, you're gonna actually have to open this braces and then put the name of the function, then from, and to exit the folder, you can just do double dots / helpers. If you have some good snippets, it'll actually do it for you. So you do like format date, and it will do everything for you. Now, we're gonna see what we're passing to this. So we're having some styles as well. And this is actually a good time to talk about styles. So styles, as you can see, they're objects and they come from React Native. So we can actually call method called create to actually make an object that is going to contain all the styles for our application or for our screen. So each, let's say, class, because these are kind of like classes in HTML. When you add class equals to container or whatever other class name you give it, it's going to be as an object. And if you look closely, this is actually CSS, just written in camel case and as an object. And you can see like some of the attributes or some of the values that we pass into this margin bottom, padding. Those are integers, and in some cases like background color, where we have to put a hexadecimal value for the color, it's just a string. You can also see that for things like font weight, we're gonna have to put it as a string, regardless if it's a number or not. And that's because font weight also has bold or light weight. So since those are also strings, you need to write the numbers also as a string. Now, let's see what else we have here. So we're gonna have a pressable, then it's gonna be the button delete. And this one has many styles because you might wanna have a button to maybe delete a task and another button to edit a task. So you can actually pass multiple classes to a component or multiple styles by writing it as an array and then say, okay, I want to include this button class, and then I'm gonna give it also the button delete class. So that's how you can include multiple classes. And we mentioned about events that this pressable component has. And here you can see that there's the on long press, and we are already seeing on press, but what's the real difference? So you can see, well, actually, you're not gonna be able to see it in a virtual machine, but if you test this on an actual device, if you have many tasks and you keep scrolling, or you're scrolling and you press right away this button, it will try to delete it if you have only on press, because the time of response was too fast that it'll detect it as okay, you press on delete. So we're gonna delete the task. So in order to avoid that, we're gonna actually include something called on long press, which is gonna be, okay, if this button is pressed for a longer time than usual, then we're gonna execute whatever we're trying to execute here, which is gonna be task delete. So yeah, that's very much it for this component. Then we're gonna have whatever the name is, delete. And again, the styles are just gonna be given. So you can even make your own styles, and you can like play around with them to try different colors and customize it however you want. Lastly, we're gonna have the final component, which is gonna be info task, which is gonna have all the details for our task. And Ryan, do you want to explain this one?
Yeah, sure. So upon creating the card from our task component, we can have the option of clicking that card. Once we click on that card, what we want is we want more details about that particular event. This is the info task component. As you see here, we will have a little pop-up that references task details, and it lists us all the details of that particular class the user just clicked on. We have course, we have the task, the due date, and description. We also have a close button for us to close out of this and go back to the home page. With that all being said, Alex, do you want to describe how we code this?
Yes. So one of the things we're gonna add again is gonna be tasks and details, because they're kind of like the same part of the same text. But if you see closely, we have a text inside of another text. And this is kind of like if you're using, for example, on a p tag on HTML, if you're using something called a span, that's very similar to just like have like a customized part of the text that you're including on your application. The next thing, again, we're going to use a pressable to make the button. And this is going to be the same thing as the form. It's going to be inside a model. That's why we have a set model task in here. And if we have time at the end, I'm going to explain more about props and this functionality of use state and props. So, okay. Here, we're going to have the close button. Then we're going to have another view for this purple bluish container that is going to have all the information from the task. So there's nothing really new from the previous components. They're all the same. We just formatted the date as again. This is where we're using also our function to format the date, the one we just showed on the helpers. And that's how it will show up, like the day, which is 03/25/22, which is like, I guess like March 25th. Okay, I think that's very much it for this component. And since we have some time, let me explain a little more about props, because I think that's the most tricky part of learning React. So props actually will help you to pass in multiple like values, or how to communicate with other components by passing some different values. So let's say to create a new task, or to add this task, we first need to know what we just created from the form. So this form will actually have like the object that we just created, right? It's gonna have a new, and this set task, which has the array of tasks that we just show on the app.js, which is this scroll view. It's gonna be actually updating this other task. Wait, what am I sharing? Okay, I'm sharing this. Okay, good. Sorry. Okay, let me show it again because I think I was showing the wrong screen. So we're gonna complete, let's say, CS1, and we're gonna say homework 2. Oh, why did it close? I don't know. Okay, I don't know why it closed. Okay, we're gonna have homework 1. We're gonna have also the date, and we're gonna have pointers, something like this. So this whole thing that I'm doing right now belongs to the handle task part. Where is the handle task of this form? Okay, this belongs to this part where we just create every single thing. And because we're using events here, it's already been updated. So we already set up the task, set the course, we already have the deadline, and also we have some details that are already updated from March state. Now, we just said that we destructured these props from here, and we're gonna be passing those to the array. That is also coming from App.js, just this one. So all this process is the same, like as we just explained. We can add the new task. And because we have an array, we can actually create different tasks here. So let me create one more. Let's say intro to the script. So I can show you also how the scroll view works in this component. So homework 1, 27, and let's call it Boolean algebra. And we're gonna add it. So now you can see how the scroll view works. And again, you can use also something called flat list instead of this, but just because I wanted to customize it more, I use a scroll view for this component. But you can research more about flat list and other components in the React Native like documentation. Okay, let's say you want to delete one of these ones. Okay, this is why I use the long press. And I guess I didn't explain this function, so why don't I explain it a little more? So there's this task delete that is going to take in the ID. That's why I said, like, we need the ID for that specific task. And we already talked about alerts, right? We mentioned alerts, but here we have some other properties here. So we're going to pass in an array that is going to be what are the buttons that we want to show up when the alert pops up. So we're going to have a cancel that is going to do nothing. And we're going to have a just delete. And this one, since an alert is kind of like has a button implemented, it has the on press property, which is going to be a function. And we're going to update that task because once we delete it, it's not going to be the same array. So now, once we filter everything, it's going to return an array. And now after that, we can update and it will re-render the component. So let's try to do that. Let's say we want to delete the middle one. Okay, this is the alert that we just mentioned. Cancel, if we cancel, do nothing. But if we do just delete, it will delete it. And it will actually move the one below to a higher position. And this is something I like from React Native because it handles very well the media queries. So this is actually really good. And you can see the information again. And we highly recommend you, or we encourage you to modify the application the way you want. Like maybe the styles, maybe you want a new functionality to add this. And also, let me show you something. If we close the application, actually I cannot show you because for some reason my emulator is bugging. But But if you close the application, this information is not going to be saved. And the reason why is because you need to add something called async storage. Async storage is going to be kind of like a database within your actual application. And that's where your data is going to be saved. So it gives like fetching all that data once the application is running. And now that I'm talking about like fetching data, that's also one of the applications where useEffect can be used for. Like useEffect can be used to fetch any information from any database or from like any JSON server that you create. And yeah, I really hope that you found this workshop and then like this introduction to React Native helpful. So again, I think that's pretty much it for today. Thank you so much.
Hey, Alex, let's go on the last slide of the PowerPoint before we close this.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So thank you all for coming. Before you leave, please fill out this feedback form that we have listed here. I will also drop it in the chat for everyone. Let me get it for y'all here. Okay. Okay, so I dropped it in chat. If any of you have time, please fill out this feedback form. It helps us a lot in creating new events in the future and helping us, giving us constructive criticism on how we can change events in the future. And for those who are still not involved within the GDSC, we will be posting an announcement later in our Discord on how to join and how to be a more active member. And all the resources that we shared today will also be posted as well as this recording. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope you have a nice day and fill out the feedback form, please.